Mike Gilbert felt like the happiest man alive. He and his longtime girlfriend had just exchanged vows and were now married. In Mike's mind, nothing could spoil this joyful moment. He and his new wife, Mary Lee, had lived in their hometown in Wisconsin since finishing college. While they didn't talk much in high school, they started dating about a year after returning home. They chose a small wedding with around 50 guests, since neither wanted a huge celebration. As they hurried to the waiting limo, Mike's best friend, Jake Davis, held the back door open for them. When they drove away from the venue, they waved to their family and friends, feeling excited. In the back seat, they held hands and smiled at each other, not paying attention to where the car was going. They were supposed to head to the Milwaukee airport for a flight to Houston, then onward to a Caribbean island. After about half an hour, Mike realized they were going the wrong way. Driver, we were supposed to go to the Milwaukee airport. You're going the wrong way," he said. He hadn't really looked at the driver until now, as he was focused on Mary. To his surprise, the driver was Todd Fisher, a guy who had bullied him in high school. "Hey, Mikey, looks like plans have changed," Todd said with a smirk. "I've got a surprise honeymoon for you two that you won't forget." He laughed, and Mike felt uneasy. He tried to open the door next to him, but it was locked. Todd told him to relax and enjoy the ride, saying there was no chance to escape. Mike thought about confronting Todd, but realized the driver was much stronger than him. Even if he succeeded, it could lead to a dangerous crash. So he leaned back and tried to come up with a plan for when they reached their destination. The worst part was that Todd always called him Mikey, something Mike disliked, and he knew Todd enjoyed pushing his buttons. They drove for a couple of hours until they reached a wooded area. Todd turned onto a narrow dirt road, continuing for another 15 minutes until they arrived at a small cabin by a lake. He parked in front of the cabin and turned off the engine. Todd turned in his seat, his voice sharp. "Listen, Mike, don't try anything foolish like running away. If you do, you'll make sure you and Mary regret it. Understand?" Mike glanced at Mary, who sat quietly, her face pale. He nodded slowly, his heart racing. When the car doors unlocked, Mike stepped out carefully and followed Todd, who held Mary's arm gently as they walked into the cabin. The cabin was small, with a wood stove in one corner, a sink in another, and a simple bed in the middle. A table stood nearby with 2 chairs. Todd pointed to one. "Sit there, Mike." Mike sat, feeling trapped as Todd tied his wrists with rope. He tugged at the bindings, but they held tight. Mary sat on the bed, her eyes fixed on the floor, silent. Todd looked at Mary, his tone mocking. "That wedding dress looks nice, Mary, but it's time to change." Mike's stomach twisted as Todd picked up a pair of scissors. He cut the dress carefully, letting it fall to the floor, leaving Mary in a plain outfit. Mike's heart sank, his fear growing as he watched helplessly. Todd smirked, pacing around Mary. "You're part of my plan now, Mary, and Mike's going to watch." Mike shouted, "No, you can't do this. She's my wife." His voice cracked with desperation, but Todd just laughed. "Oh, Mike, this is exactly why it's happening. To make you hurt." Todd turned to Mary, his voice low. "What do you think, Mary? Are you with me?" Mary's eyes widened, and she spoke for the first time, her voice shaking. I don't know." She looked at Todd, then at Mike, her face torn with confusion. Mike stared at her, his heart breaking. Why wasn't she fighting back? Why was she so quiet? Todd stepped closer to Mary, his smile cruel. "Come on, Mary. Tell Mike what you want." Mary's voice was barely a whisper. "I just want this to stop." But her words lacked strength, and Mike's hope faded. He couldn't believe it. The woman he loved seemed so different, so distant. Mike's mind raced, searching for answers. Had Mary been part of this all along? He remembered her gentle smiles, their quiet moments together. This wasn't her. Or was it? Todd's voice broke his thoughts. "You're stuck, Mike. Just watch and learn." Mary stood, her hands trembling as she faced Todd. "I don't want this," she said, her voice stronger now. She glanced at Mike, her eyes pleading. Todd laughed, unmoved. "Too late for that, Mary. You're in too deep." Mike's chest tightened, anger mixing with fear. He pulled at the ropes, his wrists burning, but they wouldn't budge. Todd leaned closer to Mary, whispering something Mike couldn't hear. Mary's face paled, and she stepped back, shaking her head. "No," she said firmly. "I won't." Todd's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. "You'll do what I say or things get worse." He turned to Mike, his voice cold. "You're both going to play my game." Mike's heart pounded, his mind scrambling for a way out. He couldn't let Todd win, not like this. Mary's eyes met Mike's, a flicker of defiance in them. She moved closer to him, her voice low. "I'm sorry, Mike. I didn't want this." Her words were soft, but they carried a weight that gave Mike a spark of hope. Maybe she wasn't fully with Todd. Maybe there was still a chance. The cabin felt smaller, the air heavy with tension. Mike's thoughts raced. He had to find a way to break free, to save Mary, to stop Todd. The ropes dug into his skin, but he kept pulling, his muscles straining. Mary's hand brushed his, a small, secret touch that felt like a promise. They were in this together, even if everything else was falling apart. To earn that privilege, you will need to do what I ask without complaining. You will also need to wear a special cage all the time. At that moment, Mike woke up from a dream, feeling very confused. He was sweating and realized that he had had a strange dream. He looked around his room and felt a wave of relief when he saw that it was just a nightmare. He noticed it was nearly 6 in the morning, so he decided to take a shower and have breakfast, knowing he wouldn't be able to sleep again for a while. An hour before his wedding ceremony with Mary, he put on his suit and waited for his best man to arrive. When the car came, Mike jumped in. Jake asked, "How are you feeling? Nervous?" Mike laughed and replied, "Yeah, a bit. I had a really strange dream last night." Before he could share more, they reached the venue for the ceremony and reception. He got busy greeting Mary's family and some friends. After the ceremony and reception finished, Mike and Mary were ready to run to the limousine while the guests tossed birdseed. Mike felt nervous but was glad to see a red limo instead of a white one like in his dream. Jake held the door for Mary while Mike climbed in from the other side. He couldn't see the driver clearly, but the driver had dark hair, unlike the person from his nightmare. The couple received a warm send-off. About 30 minutes later, Mike noticed they were going a different way, just like in his dream. Before he could speak, Mary said, "So, Mikey, there's been a change of plan. Todd, you remember Todd Fisher from school? Well, Todd is taking us to a place that is special to him and me. Now, if you behave yourself," Mary said, but Mike was not paying attention. He couldn't believe what was happening. His worst fears had come true. It felt like he was in a strange and frightening dream. While Mary continued to talk, Mike thought about what he could do. He decided he would rather face anything than stay trapped in a situation like this. When Mike finally focused on Mary again, she was saying, "You'll stay without clothes when you're in the house so we can have our fun. At night, you'll be locked up. You should just accept it." Mike noticed the long veil that Mary had removed from her head lying between them on the car seat. In a moment of anger, he picked it up and twisted it, shouting, "You can both suffer before I agree to that." He threw the veil around Todd's neck, trying to take control. Todd struggled to pull it off while driving the car. Mary, seeing Todd in trouble, tried to pull Mike back, but her actions only made things worse for Todd. Mike's eyes opened wide, and he felt panic as the world spun around him. The air in the red limo was thick with the smell of sweat and Mary's perfume from her dress. His hands shook, still feeling the grip of the veil as he had tried to fight. Memories of Todd gasping for breath and Mary's urgent pulls filled his mind. When his vision cleared, he realized he was still sitting in the back seat, the leather cool against his skin. His throat hurt, and his head pounded. Had his actions worked? Was Todd gone? Or had he failed? Next to him, Mary sat still, her hands tightly gripping a phone. Her expression was cold, focused on the dark window. She didn't look at him or acknowledge what had just happened. Her silence cut through whatever happiness was left from their wedding day. Mike's heart raced, each beat reminding him of the nightmare that was becoming more and more real. "Mary," he croaked, his voice rough, "what's going on?" Before she could answer, the car seat creaked as Todd Fisher turned to look at them. His blonde hair was slicked back, and his thick build was dressed in a neat black vest that gave him a sharp look. His lips twisted into a cruel smile, the same one that had troubled Mike in high school, the one that came with every tease, every shove, and every Mikey said with disdain. Todd waved a rusty key between his fingers, its jagged edges shining faintly in the low light. "Welcome back, Mikey," he said, full of mockery. "I have a little cabin waiting for you and your lovely bride." Mike's hands shook as he reached for the door handle, his fingers clumsy and weak from the earlier struggle. The lock clicked open, and he stumbled out of the car, the cool morning air hitting him sharply. The scene outside was calm, almost mocking in its beauty. The smooth surface of Lake St. Marie, a quiet, fictional lake hidden in the Wisconsin woods, reflected the sunlight. Tall pine trees lined the horizon, their shadows stretching across the dewy grass. The car's red paint was dusty, a bright contrast to the clear white vehicle from his nightmares. But seeing the lake, so far from where they planned to be, made him uneasy. Everything felt off. Mary stepped out behind him, her white dress catching the light, the hem stained and torn from some past struggle. She walked with a careful grace, her lips forming a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. Leaning in close, she whispered in his ear, "This is only the start, Mikey." The name Mikey stung, a reminder of Todd's cruelty and a betrayal from the woman he had promised to love only hours before. Her voice was soft, almost gentle, but it held a weight that made him uneasy. The car moved forward, tires making noise as it drove over a narrow dirt path lined with wild grass brushing against its sides. Dust filled the air, settling on the red paint like a cover. Mike's legs felt heavy, his mind racing to understand how they had ended up here after everything that happened in the car. Had he lost consciousness? Had Todd been too strong? The questions troubled him, but he kept moving, glancing back and forth between Mary and Todd, looking for any sign of weakness. Todd parked the car in front of a rundown wooden cabin, its old boards covered in patches of green moss. The cabin stood by the water's edge, its only window dark and unwelcoming. "Welcome to your honeymoon suite," Todd said, his tone full of sarcasm. "A special place for a special couple." He stepped out, his boots sinking into the soft ground, and motioned toward the cabin with a dramatic gesture. Mary crossed her arms, showing she was in control, but Mike noticed her hands shaking slightly as she glanced at him. For a brief moment her eyes softened, a break in her tough exterior, but then it disappeared just as quickly. She walked toward the cabin, her heels sinking into the dirt, moving with purpose and grace. Mike felt his heart racing as he followed, each step on the creaking porch sending a wave of worry through him. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of damp wood and something he couldn't identify. The floor creaked under him, the sound echoing in the small, bare room, a single bed with a worn quilt, a rusty sink in one corner, and a wood stove that seemed to have been unused for years. Todd slammed the door shut, the sound echoing like a loud bang. Mike flinched, his eyes darting to the ceiling where a faint red light blinked an invisible camera, its presence a quiet threat. Todd's grin grew wider as he locked the door, the noise loud and serious. "No one's coming for you, Mikey," he said in a low, threatening voice, "so you'd better behave." Mary lifted her dress slightly, showing the torn, muddy hem, and Mike's breath caught. The fabric, once a sign of their love, now looked like a reminder of loss. She looked at him, and for a second he thought he saw doubt, a glimpse of the woman he once loved. But she turned away, slowly taking off her lace gloves, the action careful and deliberate, as if she was letting go of part of herself. Mike wiped the sweat from his forehead, his hands clammy, his mind racing for a way out. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air becoming heavier with each second. Todd pushed Mike toward a corner of the room, holding his shoulder tightly. "Sit there and watch," he said roughly, forcing Mike to look at Mary. "And don't even think about trying something. You know what happens when you do." The memory of a past event flashed through Mike's mind, but the weight of his feelings was stronger. He sank into the corner, trembling, his eyes on Mary as she began to take off her gloves, her movements almost ritualistic. Mary stepped closer to Mike, her fingers brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. She leaned in, her voice a soft whisper that felt deeper than any shout. "I can hear your heart breaking, Mikey," she said, her breath warm against his cheek. But her eyes revealed her feelings a flicker of pain, a hint of doubt that clashed with her calm exterior. Mike felt sick, caught between anger and confusion. Who was this woman? The Mary he'd known had never called him Mikey or used her words so harshly. Yet here she was, involved in Todd's strange game. Before Mike could say anything, a low hum filled the air, and a beam of green-purple light sliced through the cabin's window, sweeping over the room like a searchlight. Mike's heart raced as the light moved across the walls, highlighting the blinking camera and making eerie shadows. Todd's smile faded for a moment as he looked outside, his eyes narrowing. "Looks like the real fun's about to start," he said, his voice mixing anticipation and maybe unease. The drone's light lit up Mary, giving her an unusual glow. She stood still, her hands gripping the gloves, her face unreadable. Mike's mind raced, hoping that this interruption might be his chance to escape, to break free from the nightmare that had caught him. But Todd's presence, the locked door, and Mary's mysterious look kept him rooted in place. Whatever game they were playing was far from over, and the rules were about to change. The green-purple light from the drone faded, leaving the cabin in a dim, heavy gloom. Mike's chest tightened as fear and betrayal weighed heavily on him. The blinking red light of the hidden camera pulsed like a heartbeat, reminding him that every moment was being watched and recorded. His wrists throbbed, tightly bound to the arms of a rough wooden chair with stiff straps digging into his skin. His throat was dry, each swallow painful, as if he'd been shouting for hours. The musty air of the cabin surrounded him, heavy with the smell of damp wood and something sharper, perhaps fear, or the bitterness of his own desperation. He blinked, trying to clear his mind, Mary's words echoing, "I can hear your heart breaking, Mikey," like a cruel reminder. The door creaked open and Mary stepped inside, changing the atmosphere around her. Gone was her mud-stained dress, replaced by a fitted black gown that moved with a dangerous grace. She moved like a shadow, her steps soft on the creaking floorboards, her auburn hair flowing over one shoulder. In her hands, she held an old leather notebook, its edges worn and yellowed. Her eyes, usually warm, now seemed sharp and unreadable, like a character from a suspenseful story. As she looked at Mike, a brief flash of something maybe guilt crossed her face, but it was too quick to believe. Todd followed closely behind, his heavy boots thumping on the floor. He carried a bottle of rum, tilting it mockingly toward Mike. "Thirsty, Mikey?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He poured some into a chipped glass and forced it to Mike's lips. The strong drink burned as Mike gulped it down. "Drink up. You'll need it for what's next." The alcohol stung inside him, but it did little to ease the panic rising in his chest. Todd's smirk felt sharp, worsening with every Mikey he threw out. Mary moved in closer, her heels clicking softly as she opened a notebook. She flipped to a page marked with an old ribbon, showing a series of numbers written in dark ink, 562312. Her fingers stayed on the page, and for a moment, her eyes softened, revealing a hint of vulnerability. "This is your key, Mike," she said quietly, almost hesitantly. "Your way out. Or in." The weight of her words filled the air, and Mike felt the tremor in her voice. He stared at the numbers, his mind racing. 562312. They felt familiar, like something he had almost forgotten. Then he realized what they meant, a blow to his heart. May 6th, 2023, Todd's birthday. December 12th, Mary's. Those dates were etched in his memory from the many times he'd planned surprises for Mary, from the stories she had shared about her past. His heart sank, a mix of betrayal and disbelief. These weren't just numbers. They tied his wife to his rival. Todd leaned against the wall, arms crossed, an even bigger grin on his face as he watched Mike's expression crumble. "Got it now, huh?" he said, satisfaction oozing from his voice. "Mary and I go way back. We were together long before you came along." Each word hammered at the carefully built idea of his marriage. Mike felt an urge to shout, to deny it all, but Mary's silence and her avoidance of his gaze spoke volumes. Mary stepped closer, her face hard to read as she met Mike's eyes. "You're under our control now, Mike," she said, her voice icy, but her hands gripping the notebook so tightly her knuckles turned pale. Each word felt like a sting, a betrayal. Yet there was something in her hold, the way her fingers shook, that didn't quite match her harsh tone. Mike's thoughts raced, looking for a sign, a crack in her tough exterior that showed he was still loved. His gaze shifted around the room until it landed on a small, rusty safe tucked beneath the sink. The numbers 562312 had to be the combination. It was too clear, too planned. "The safe," he said, his voice rough but steady. "That's what the code is for, right?" He tried to stay calm, to focus, even as his heart raced. If he could open the safe, maybe he could find a way to turn things around. Todd let out a low laugh. "Smart boy," he said, nodding to Mary. "Go on, make him do it. Let's see if Mikey has the courage to dig into our little surprise." His mocking tone carried an edge that made Mike uneasy. Mary hesitated, looking at Todd before turning back to Mike. She crossed the room slowly, almost hesitantly, and knelt beside him. Her fingers brushed against his chest, lingering for a moment. "I need you to open it, Mike," she whispered, her voice barely a sound, filled with worry. "You have to." Her touch was warm, familiar, but it made him feel uneasy. Was she playing him, or did she mean something else? Mike remembered a time in high school he had pushed aside. Todd had towered over him in the locker room, shoving a crumpled note into his hand with a sneer. "Keep it, Mikey. You'll need it someday." The note had meant nothing then, just another taunt, but now the memory surged up, the numbers written in Todd's messy handwriting, 562312. His heart raced. Had Todd planned this all along? A twisted game for years? Desperate, Mike looked at the table where his old phone sat, a reminder of their earlier days together. If he could get it, maybe he could find the note in his old app and confirm the connection. He twisted against the straps holding him, but before he could move, Todd reached out, grabbing the phone. "No tricks, Mikey," he growled, smashing the device against the wall. Shards of glass and plastic flew across the floor, and Mike's hope fell with it. Mary's eyes widened, panic crossing her face as she saw the phone break. She turned away, moving quickly to the safe. Her fingers shook as she entered the code 562312. The lock clicked open, revealing a single, yellowed envelope inside. She pulled it out, her hands trembling, and when she opened it, a folded letter slipped into her palm. Her expression changed, revealing a moment of true pain that Mike had never seen before. "What is it?" Mike asked, his voice trembling. He strained against the straps, tears welling in his eyes as he watched her. The letter, the code, the safe, it was all part of their struggle, but the sorrow on Mary's face was genuine. She held the letter close to her chest, her eyes meeting his with a mix of guilt and desperation. "It's us," she whispered, her voice soft. "It's always been us." Her words hung in the air, thick with meaning Mike struggled to understand. He wanted to be angry, to shout at her for betraying him, but seeing her trembling hands and the way the letter seemed to burn her fingers sparked a bit of curiosity among his anger. What was in that letter? Why did it make Mary, who had once called him a puppet, look so fragile? Todd's laughter broke the quiet, loud and harsh. "Oh, this is good," he said, stepping closer to Mary. "Show him, sweetheart. Let Mikey see your true self." His taunting words were a challenge, but Mary stayed still, her gaze fixed on the letter, her breath shaky. Mike's tears fell, his heart torn between anger and a strong desire to understand. The camera's red light blinked faster, eager to capture this moment. Whatever was in that letter, whatever bond connected Mary and Todd, Mike knew it would change everything. As this realization sank in, the cabin felt smaller, the walls pressing in, trapping him in a confusing situation where the rules were unclear. The air in the cabin was tense, the faint red glow of the hidden camera watching like a predator. Mike sat in a wooden chair, his wrists sore from the restraints, his heart still reeling from seeing the letter in Mary's shaky hands. Her words, "It's always been us," echoed in his mind like a painful riddle. The old envelope she held seemed to contain a truth that could change everything, but Todd's mocking laughter brought Mike back to the uncomfortable reality of the cabin. The walls, covered in moss and secrets, felt like they were closing in, turning the small space into a stage where Mike was both a prisoner and an unwilling participant. Todd moved closer, his heavy footsteps loud on the creaky floor. He took the letter from Mary's hands, his fingers brushing against hers in a way that made Mike uneasy. Slowly, he pinned the letter to the wall, its edges curling against the damp wood. The words, written in a messy, youthful style, were too far away for Mike to read, but they felt like a challenge, a reminder of the past that connected Mary to Todd. "This," Todd declared, his voice full of malice, "is your script, Mikey, your part in our little show." He turned to Mary, his grin broadening. "Make him read it." Mary hesitated, her eyes darting to the letter before returning to Mike. Her black dress shimmered softly in the low light, highlighting her strong stance, but her face showed a mix of determination and something gentler, maybe regret. "Read it, Mike," she said, her voice sharp but not matching her eyes. She stepped closer, holding up the letter, avoiding his gaze. "Read the promises we made. Let's hear how they sound now." Her words were harsh, but her hands shook, revealing the struggle beneath her calm exterior. Before Mike could reply, the cabin door creaked open, making noise. A young woman came in, slim but commanding attention. She wore a dark hat pulled low, and some strands of black hair framed her face. Her bright eyes quickly locked onto Mike's with a curious look that made him feel uneasy. "Imhana," she said, her tone businesslike. She carried a small bag that made soft sounds as she placed it on the table. "First aid," she added, glancing at Todd. "You said he might need it." Todd smirked. "Hana's our backup plan, Mikey," he said, his voice casual but carrying an edge. "She makes sure you and your wife don't do anything foolish. Keeps everything orderly." He waved toward the bag as if it wasn't important, but his eyes remained fixed on Mike, looking for any sign of defiance. Mary's expression turned serious, and she tossed a phone to Hana, which landed softly in her hands. "Record this," Mary instructed, her voice sharp, but her eyes showed worry when they met Mike's. "Every moment. We don't want to miss a thing." Hana nodded and quickly turned on the phone's camera. A soft sound filled the room as the lens focused, casting a gentle glow on Mike's face. His tense features were visible in the phone screen, revealing his inner turmoil. Mike's heart raced, each beat pushing him to take action. His fingers twitched, testing the bands securing his wrists. They were tight, but not impossible to loosen. If he could just shift his weight, maybe he could get free. He twisted slightly, the chair creaking beneath him, watching Hana's camera to see if she was paying attention. The straps loosened a little, a flicker of hope igniting within him. This was his chance, however small. Mary's eyes snapped to him, narrowing as she noticed his movement. In one quick motion, she grabbed a wooden sword, a rough makeshift weapon propped against the wall, and pressed its blunt edge against Mike's throat. The wood was cold, a silent warning, but her hand shook, revealing her uncertainty. "Please don't," she whispered, her voice soft but firm. Her eyes close to his showed a mix of emotions, anger, fear, and something deeper that Mike couldn't understand. Todd laughed, a low and unsettling sound. He turned off the main camera's blinking light, bringing a false sense of calm to the room. But then, a faint sound came from under the floor, and another hidden light turned on. "You thought I'd let you go that easily, didn't you, Mikey?" he said teasingly. "Every moment, every reaction, it's all being recorded." Mary stepped back, still holding the wooden sword. She looked at Todd, her face giving nothing away, then made a quick motion with her head. "Give him a different challenge," she said, her voice calm but urgent. "Don't hurt him, not yet." The coldness in her words felt heavy, and Mike wondered if she was trying to protect him or just postponing what was to come. Todd's smile grew wider as he took out an old pocket watch from his vest. He opened it, the ticking loud in the stillness, and placed it on the table with a thud. 10 minutes, Mikey," he said, his eyes shining. "You've got 10 minutes to figure out another code. Get it right, and you might learn something valuable. Get it wrong." He left the warning hanging in the air. Mike's mind raced with the numbers from the safe 562312 still fresh in his memory. But now, he needed a new code. His eyes searched the room for clues. The letter on the wall, the safe, the broken phone. Nothing stood out. He tried to remember moments with Todd from high school, anything that might help. He had a fleeting image of Todd writing numbers on a locker, laughing as he walked away. But what were those numbers? His head throbbed, the minutes ticking down like a countdown to something dire. Mary leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear. "Figure it out, Mike," she said, her voice a mix of challenge and something more urgent. "Or I'll have to shift the game." Her words were a warning, but her tone showed a hint of concern, a crack in her tough exterior that made Mike's heart ache. Was she acting, or was she caught in this situation just like he was? The watch ticked on, each tick pushing Mike's nerves to the edge. He strained against the restraints, his wrists aching, his mind a storm of fear and determination. The letter on the wall seemed to pulse, its words full of secrets he couldn't yet solve. Hannah's camera whirred, capturing every drop of sweat, every flicker of worry in his eyes. Todd's laughter filled the room, harsh and mocking as Mike struggled. As the last moments ticked away, the sound of the watch seemed louder and louder. Mike's breath caught, and his mind went blank, the answer slipping away from him. Suddenly there was a low noise from the floor, and a trapdoor swung open, revealing a dark space below. The air grew colder, heavier, with a faint smell of damp earth. Mike's heart raced as he stared into the darkness, knowing that whatever was down there would change everything. The trapdoor creaked like a beast awakening, and Mike's heart pounded in his chest as he looked at the dark void. The air chilled even more, bringing a musty scent that made it hard to breathe. The red light of a hidden camera blinked above, a constant reminder of his helpless situation. His wrists still felt tight from the straps as he tried to move, the chair creaking under him. The ticking of Todd's watch stopped, and the quietness seemed even worse, filled with a sense of danger lurking below. Todd crossed the room with heavy steps, his big shadow looming over Mike. "Time to go deeper, Mikey," he said, his voice full of delight. He yanked Mike from the chair, causing pain to shoot through his shoulders. The straps fell away, but before Mike could react, Todd's grasp tightened, pulling him toward the trapdoor. Todd's laughter echoed in the dark cellar as they moved down the rickety stairs. Each step creaked, and the air felt heavier, as if they were being swallowed by the earth itself. The cellar was dark and shadowy, lit only by a dim red light from a single bulb hanging above. The walls held photographs, curled at the edges and stuck up as if they were trophies of a troubled mind. Mike's breath caught as he looked closer and recognized the picture's snaps of him and Mary, moments captured from their life. Their first date at the fair, her laughter shining as they rode the Ferris wheel, a picture of them sharing a kiss under a willow tree, and their engagement photo with her hand on his, the ring sparkling. Each photo felt like a stab to his heart, proof that Todd had been watching, collecting, and planning. Mary came along, her black dress flowing like a ghost's gown. She held a small flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness as she directed it at the wall. The light fell on their wedding photo, now wrinkled and torn, with edges burnt as if someone had held it to the fire. Her hand shook, the light flickered, and her voice cracked as she spoke. "Look at us, Mike," she whispered, her tone filled with a deep sadness. "Look at what we were." The words lingered in the air, heavy with sorrow that didn't match the harshness she had shown earlier. Mike stepped back, his shoulder hitting the damp wall. The photographs seemed to pulse, each one a piece of a life he thought he understood. "You let him do this," he said, his voice thick with hurt. "You let him take everything." This realization felt like a weight crushing the last bits of hope. Todd's obsession was not just a simple high school feud. It had been a long, careful invasion of their lives. A soft sound broke the silence as Hannah tossed a small wooden box down the stairs. It landed at Mike's feet, its surface etched with detailed patterns, a rusty lock shining in the dim light. Her eyes, shaded beneath her cap, showed a hint of worry as she glanced at Todd. "Open it," she said, her voice firm but shaky. "It's for him." Mike's heart raced, sensing a crack in her loyalty, a moment of doubt that didn't fit with Todd's control. Todd's grin grew wider, his eyes bright with cruel enjoyment. "Go on, Mikey," he said, nudging the box closer. "Face your past, open it, or I'll make sure Mary regrets it." He sounded playful, but the threat was clear, like a shadow hanging over Mike's already shaken nerves. Mike knelt, his fingers trembling as he worked the lock. The rusty mechanism snapped open, revealing a small glass vial with a cloudy liquid inside, its label faded and unsettling. He froze, his mind racing. Drugs? Something dangerous? Whatever it was part of Todd's twisted game, another turn in this nightmare. He looked up, meeting Mary's gaze, but her expression was unreadable, her eyes puffy and glassy. Mary stepped forward, her flashlight shaking in her hand. She opened the vial, inhaling deeply, her eyes closing as the fumes surrounded her. When they opened, they were bloodshot and wild. "Let's see what you're really scared of, Mikey," she said, her voice low and firm. She held the vial close to him, her hand steady despite the chaos in her eyes. "Breathe." Mike tried to pull away, but Todd's hand gripped his shoulder, holding him still. The fumes stung his nose, sharp and chemical, and his vision blurred as the room spun. Images flooded his mind, Mary and Todd, together in a moonlit field, laughing as they teased him. The memory felt real, intense, but it couldn't be. Could it? He gasped, his throat tightening as the images became clearer, Mary standing close to Todd, her lips sharing secrets meant for someone else. "No!" Mike shouted, his voice raw and echoing off the stone walls. The line between what was real and what he imagined blurred, and the photos on the walls seemed to move, their subjects laughing and mocking him. He reached out, trying to steady himself, but the visions held him tightly. Each one felt like a betrayal deep inside him. Mary dropped a small bottle, and it shattered on the stone floor. She rushed to Mike, wrapping her arms around him, her body shaking against his. "I always chose you," she whispered, her voice trembling, a sharp contrast to what had just happened. Always. But her words felt empty, lost in the chaos of the images still swirling in Mike's head. Her hug felt like a trap, her warmth deceptive. Todd's laughter echoed, cold and harsh. "Look at him wiggle," he said, glancing at Hannah, who stood quietly, her camera capturing every movement and sound. The red light from a hidden camera below flickered faster, as if feeding off Mike's pain. "This is gold, Mikey, just perfect." The visions grew stronger, the cellar turning into a stifling space. Mike felt his chest tighten, the air growing thin as the walls seemed to press in on him, dirt falling from above. He felt buried, trapped underground, his cries lost beneath the weight of it all. His hands grasped at nothing, his body shaking as the vision overwhelmed him. "I'm fading," he whispered, his voice weak. His legs gave way and he collapsed onto the cold stone floor, everything around him darkening. The last thing he saw was Mary's face, her eyes wide with fear, her hands reaching for him as if trying to bring him back. But the darkness was unyielding, swallowing him completely. Hannah took a step forward, her camera still running, but her eyes moved to Todd. Her lips pressed into a thin line, defiance flickering in her gaze. "This is too much," she whispered, so softly that Mike could barely hear through the haze of his fading thoughts. Her words were a spark, hinting that not everyone in this twisted situation agreed with Todd's harsh ways. The red light in the cellar pulsed one last time, casting long shadows across the photos, the shattered bottle, and Mike's fallen form. Whatever lay hidden in the darkness was just starting to come to light, and the struggle was far from over. Mike fought to awaken from the shadows, his body jerking awake on the cold stone floor of the cellar. His head throbbed, a steady pain blurring his vision, and his muscles ached as if he had endured a great deal. The air was thick, filled with the smell of wet earth and strange fumes. A single light bulb in the cellar flickered weakly, casting strange shadows on walls filled with pictures from a life he no longer recognized. Although his wrists were free from the straps, they showed red marks, and his throat felt sore, each breath a struggle. He couldn't shake the memory of his visions, Mary and Todd together, laughing as they turned against him. Mary knelt next to him, her dark dress spreading like spilled ink. Her hands shook as she hurried to wrap a cloth around his sore wrists, her fingers brushing against his skin with a softness that felt strange after everything. Tears shone in her eyes, reflecting the dim light, and her face looked pained, so different from the person who had forced the strange substance on him. "Mike," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I'm sorry." Her words were quiet, almost fading into the heavy silence, but they felt heavy, cutting through his pain and confusion. Todd hovered above them, his large figure outlined against the flickering light. He held a whip, its twisted form resting in his hand, and his eyes sparkled with a cruel joy. "You thought you could just pass out and miss the fun, Mikey?" he mocked, his voice low and threatening. He cracked the whip against the floor, the loud sound echoing sharply, making Mike flinch. "There's a price for disobedience, and you're about to pay." Mike's gaze shifted to Mary, his heart racing with feelings of desperation and betrayal. He took her hand tightly, his eyes pleading for her help. "Mary, please," he struggled to say, his voice hoarse. "Stop this. You don't have to do this." His words felt like a lifeline, a hope that the woman he loved, who just hours ago had promised to be with him, was still inside her. Mary looked into his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, regret was clear on her face. Tears flowed down her cheeks, brushing away the dirt. She opened her mouth, but only a sob escaped, a sound that seemed to break her inside. She held his hand tightly, her grip shaky, as if she were fighting with a choice she couldn't express. The tension between them felt fragile, a crack in her earlier resolve. Something changed inside Mike, a spark of defiance rising from his hopelessness. He fixed his eyes on the whip in Todd's hand, its leather shining in the dull light. With a sudden burst of energy, he lunged forward, grabbing the handle of the whip. The action was impulsive, driven by a need to fight back rather than a plan, but the look on Todd's face made it worthwhile. "No more," Mike said firmly, pulling the whip away with strength that made Todd stagger back. Todd's surprise quickly turned to anger as he charged to get the weapon back. "You little brat!" he yelled, reaching for the whip, but Mike was quicker, motivated by a strong desire to defend himself. He pushed Todd with all his strength, causing the larger man to hit the cellar wall hard. Pictures shook on the wall, and one fell to the ground, its glass frame breaking like a loud crack. The cellar filled with chaos. Mike, Mary, and Todd struggled with each other, the whip snapping wildly as it hit the ceiling. Then the light bulb burst, filling the room with sparks and plunging it into near darkness, lit only by the faint red light of a hidden camera. Shadows flickered on the walls, turning their fight into a scene from a nightmare. Mike's heart raced, adrenaline coursing through him as he tried to keep Todd away, his muscles sore from the effort. Hannah, who had been quiet in the corner, suddenly cried out in fear. She tripped over a metal toolbox, making it crash to the floor. The lid flew open, spilling tools like a hammer, a screwdriver, and a shiny knife that slid toward Mike. Hannah froze, her eyes wide in fear, forgetting her camera as she watched the chaos unfold. Mike realized he had a chance. He quickly grabbed the leather straps that had bound him, clumsily wrapping them around Todd's wrists. Todd thrashed and shouted angrily, but Mike pulled tight, tying the straps with a strength he didn't know he had. "Stay down!" he shouted, his voice rough, as Todd's struggles began to fade, his large body pinned against the wall. Mary seized Mike's arm with urgency, her voice shaking. "We need to go, Mike," she urged, dragging him toward the old stairs. Her dress caught on a rough step, ripping audibly, but she pressed on, her eyes fixed on the trapdoor above. "Now!" Her voice was filled with both fear and determination, a reminder of the woman Mike had cared for, now desperate to escape the nightmare they were in together. Todd's furious voice came from the darkness. "You think it's over, Mikey? I will find you. You will pay for this." His words were filled with anger, each one steeped in hatred as he struggled against the straps. The sound of his boots scraping on the stone floor followed them, a constant reminder of his threat. Mike's hands shook as he reached the trap door, struggling with the old latch. He slammed it shut and pushed a heavy bolt into place, the metal squeaking loudly. Todd's muffled calls came from below, each one hitting Mike hard. "You can't run forever," Todd shouted, his voice warped by the thick wood. Mary and Mike rushed into the cabin above, breathing heavily, their bodies close together in a tight hug. Tears soaked Mike's shirt as Mary held onto him, desperate and scared. But then, everything changed when they saw Hannah standing behind them, holding a tool from the box, its blade dangerously close to them. Her eyes showed confusion, caught between loyalty to Todd and something else, maybe fear or uncertainty. "Don't move," she said softly, her voice shaky, her hands tight on the tool. Before Mike could respond, a loud noise filled the air, getting louder each moment. A bright light shone through the cabin's broken window. scanning the room like a spotlight. The sound of a helicopter flew above them, shaking the walls and kicking up dust from the ceiling. Mike felt a surge of hope mixed with fear. Was this help or something worse? The light focused on Hannah, showing her troubled thoughts. She lowered the tool a bit, glancing between the window and Mike and Mary. The helicopter's roar grew even louder, its spotlight surrounding them in a stark light, highlighting their tense moment. Mike realized that everything had changed, and the situation was more serious than ever. The thumping of the helicopter echoed loudly in the cabin, its bright light flooding through the broken window, trapping Mike and Mary in a harsh glow. Hannah stood still, trembling as she gripped the tool, its blade still near them. Her eyes, filled with struggle, moved between them and the window, where the light moved like a predator. Mike's heart raced as he held Mary tightly, her tears soaking his shirt. The cabin was thick with dust and fear, the walls shaking with the helicopter's noise. Todd's muffled calls from the locked cellar below reminded them of the nightmare they had just escaped. But the helicopter's presence brought a new fear, turning Mike's brief hope of rescue into worry. Gripping Mary's arm, Mike pulled her toward the door, his muscles aching from their earlier struggle. They stepped out into the cool night air, the wet grass slippery under their feet as they crawled toward a small, nearby clearing. The lake's smooth surface reflected the helicopter's light, which swept over the ground like a searchlight looking for something. Mike's heart raced in his chest, each beat reminding him of how exposed they were. Mary held onto him tightly, breathing heavily, her black dress torn and dirty. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice barely rising above the noise of the helicopter. The aircraft came down, its landing gear touching the ground and kicking up clouds of dust. Figures appeared from its side, dressed in black uniforms, their faces hidden by shiny masks that glinted in the moonlight. They moved swiftly and quietly, spreading out to surround the clearing, their weapons shining in a threatening way. Mike felt a knot in his stomach. These weren't police or heroes. Their silence and sharp movements suggested something much more dangerous. "Who are they?" he whispered, his voice shaky, keeping his eyes on the approaching figures. Mary held on to him tighter, trembling as she pressed her face against his chest. "Don't let them take us," she cried out, her voice filled with fear, unlike the calmness she had shown before. Her fear was real, sparking doubt in Mike's mind. Was she really a victim in this twisted situation, or was there more to her story? Before he could think further, someone jumped out from the bushes, leaping over a low fence. "Mike! Mary! Come with me now!" It was Jake, his best friend, his face showing urgency and determination. His sudden appearance felt like a lifeline in the chaos. Mike remembered the wedding, Jake's cheerful smile as he held the limo door. Had he sensed trouble even then? Without hesitating, Mike took Mary's hand and pulled her up as they ran toward Jake. The three of them jumped into the back of an old pickup truck, its tarp flapping in the wind. Jake slammed the driver's door, and the engine roared to life with a deep sound. The truck lurched forward, wheels spinning in the mud as they hurried away from the clearing. The helicopter's spotlight followed them, its beam slicing through the dark, but Jake swerved into the safety of thick trees, and the light faded as the trees blocked it. The helicopter took off, its blades fading into the background noise, leaving a trail of red smoke in the sky. Mike's chest heaved, hands gripping the truck's rough frame as he tried to make sense of everything. Mary sat beside him, her face pale, eyes wide with shock. "Jake," she whispered, her voice shaking. "What's happening?" Jake glanced in the rearview mirror, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I had a bad feeling when that limo took a wrong turn," he said quietly, urgency in his tone. "I followed you. I saw the cabin and heard the screams. Todd's not working alone, Mike. This is a much bigger problem." His words hit Mike hard, feeding his worry that the frightening situation was wider than Todd's personal feud. Mary's face went pale, her hands fumbling in her lap. "What did Todd do to us?" she asked, her voice soft and fearful, searching Jake's face for answers. The air was heavy with the unasked question as the truck bumped along the dirt road, the cabin's shape coming into view. Jake reached into a bag on the passenger seat, pulling out a homemade radar device. The screen flickered with green static. "This picked up a signal from the cabin," he said, his voice serious. "Something sending a signal from their cameras, maybe. We need to find out what it is." The device beeped, a small pulse showing on the screen, pointing back at the cabin they had just escaped. Mike's thoughts raced, feeling the weight of their situation settling in his stomach. "We have to go back," he said firmly, despite the fear building inside him. "If there's proof in that cellar, something to show what Todd has done, we need it." The choice was risky, but the other option, running without a plan, chased by unseen dangers, felt worse. Mary's eyes widened, her hand clutching his. "Mike, no," she said, her voice heavy with fear. "You saw what's down there. We can't go back." But her words felt uncertain, her gaze glancing toward the cabin as if it was pulling her in. The truck came to a halt next to the cabin, its tires crunching on the gravel. Jake opened the side door, shining his flashlight into the darkness as they stepped out. The cabin was quiet, its windows dark, but a small flickering light shone through the cracks of the cellar door, like a heartbeat coming from below. Mary stood still, her eyes fixed on the trap door, holding her breath. "There's something down there," she whispered quietly. Jake moved the flashlight across the cabin's porch, the light catching a rusted hinge. He advanced cautiously, peering through a narrow gap in the trap door. "He's still there," he said, his voice low and tense. The beam of light revealed Todd's figure, hunched against the cellar wall, looking wild, struggling against his bindings. Mike's heart raced, a blend of fear and courage filling him. He looked at Jake, then at Mary, whose face showed both worry and determination. "We end this now," Mike said firmly, even though his hands shook. The three friends braced themselves, their footsteps heavy as they walked down the dark stairs into the cellar, ready to face the man who had turned their wedding day into a nightmare, and whoever helped him. The darkness of the cellar surrounded Mike, Mary, and Jake as they walked down the creaky wooden stairs. Their footsteps echoed loudly in the heavy silence. Light from Jake's flashlight broke through the shadows, revealing Todd's large figure against the damp stone wall. His wrists were still tied, and he scowled with anger and desperation. The air felt thick with the smell of dampness and earth, mixed with the faint scent of strange fumes from earlier. Mike's heart raced, and he felt tense, caught between fear and determination. The cabin above had briefly felt like a safe place, but coming back to this dark space reminded him of a nightmare they had to face to get to the truth. Mary reached out and touched the wall to steady herself, her fingers brushing against a small device set into the stone. She stopped, her breath catching as she carefully pried it loose, a small tape recorder, its red light blinking softly. She pressed play, and Todd's voice filled the cellar, cold and calculating. "You'll break, Mikey. You'll beg, just like you did before. This is for every time you thought you could outsmart me." Todd's words were like a harsh reminder of his plan to hurt Mike, a way to reclaim control for something that happened long ago in high school. The recording ended with a chilling laugh, echoing off the walls like a ghost. Mike felt a coldness wash over him, his fists clenching in anger. The photos on the walls, memories of his life with Mary, seemed to taunt him, a sign of Todd's obsession. He lunged forward, grabbing the recorder from Mary and smashing it apart, the plastic breaking easily in his hands. "No more," he said fiercely. He picked up a sharp piece of the broken recorder and a stub of chalk from the ground, quickly writing a new message on the wall. "You lose, Todd." It was a bold statement, a last effort to change the course of this twisted game. Just then, the cellar door creaked and Hannah appeared, her figure outlined by the small light coming through the trap door. She carried an old leather bag that looked worn but was still intact. Her eyes, shaded by her wool cap, moved nervously between Mike and Todd, revealing a bit of her usual calm was slipping away. She tossed the bag to Mary, who caught it with shaking hands. "You should see this," Hannah said, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "It's not just about him anymore." She glanced at Todd, standing a bit taller as if to show her strength. Mary opened the bag, her fingers fumbling with the clasps. Inside were old black and white photographs, their edges worn. The pictures showed a younger Mary and Todd, their faces filled with youthful joy, sharing secret moments behind a bleacher, laughing in a cozy diner, their hands clasped together. Mary's breath caught in her throat, her eyes shining with unshed tears as she shook her head. "He tricked me back then," she whispered. her voice shaky. I was young, Mike. I didn't understand who he really was. This honesty broke through the mask she had worn since their trip, but Mike still felt a pang of doubt. Was this the truth, or just another part of her act? Mike grabbed Jake's flashlight and aimed it into the bag. Beneath the photos was a folder marked with a company logo, an artistic raven surrounded by thorns. The papers inside held financial records, strange messages, and names Mike didn't know. His heart raced as he flipped through the pages, realizing they were about Todd's connections to a mysterious group. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice sharp, glancing at Todd, who had gone strangely quiet. Jake knelt beside him, studying the documents with a worried frown. "Todd's more than just a bully," he said, his voice serious. "He's a puppet. This group has been using him to get to you, Mike. We're all caught up in their plan." His words opened Mike's eyes, showing that the situation was bigger than Todd's personal grudges. The helicopter and the masked figures had all started to connect. They weren't just trying to escape Todd. They were fleeing from something much larger. Mary's expression grew firm, determination shining through her tears. She stepped toward the old intercom system, her hands shaking as she pressed the button. "Todd?" she said, her voice steady despite her tears. "I have your files. Everything you've done, everything you're linked to. If I share this, you're done." Her challenge echoed in the room, making Mike feel a mix of pride and fear. Todd's expression changed, his eyes filled with anger. "You wouldn't do that!" he spat, his voice low but filled with venom. Before anyone could respond, a faint hiss filled the air, and a cloud of sharp-smelling gas burst from hidden vents. The harsh smell burned Mike's throat, and his eyes watered as he began to cough. Mary and Jake bent over, gasping in the small space as the gas stung their skin like tiny needles. Mike took Mary's hand, his eyes blurry, and whispered, "We fight back. Together." His voice was rough, but he had a clear plan use the confusion to their advantage. He signaled to Jake, who nodded, tears in his eyes but determined to help. They moved together toward Todd, who was still trying to break free from his restraints. The gas thickened around them, making it hard to think, but Mike's anger gave him strength. Suddenly, a wooden beam overhead creaked, weakened by age. Mike picked up a piece of rebar from the floor and swung it at the beam. It splintered, crashing down in a cloud of dust. A sliver of light shone through the opening, blinding them and revealing Todd's furious face as he fought against his binds. Mary grabbed some rope from the corner, her movements quick but steady. She tied it around a suitcase, her hands trembling as she ran it through an old pulley in the ceiling. "Pull!" she shouted, her voice rising above the chaos. Mike and Jake seized the rope, pulling the suitcase toward the opening, its weight making it hard to move. Inside were important documents they needed if they could just get them out. With one final effort, the three of them scrambled up the stairs, their lungs aching from the gas, tears streaming down their faces. They burst out onto the cabin's porch, dazzled by the bright morning sun after the darkness below. The air felt fresh, and the lake sparkled like glass, but their relief turned to worry at the sight of a figure standing in the shadows by the trees. The stranger's face was hidden, and they stood watching with a rigid posture that sent shivers down Mike's back. Who could they be? Another ally of Todd, or something different? The suitcase lay at their feet, holding documents that could either help or hurt them. Mike held Mary's hand tighter, feeling his heart race as he realized their struggles were not over. The stranger's presence, the suitcase, the gas, everything in this tense situation pointed to a bigger game, one where they were still players, but now with something to fight back with. The morning sun glowed over Lake St. Marie, its light shimmering on the water. Mike, Mary, and Jake stood on the porch, breathing heavily, the suitcase of vital documents clutched firmly in Mary's hands. The air felt fresh, yet the weight of the stranger's stare from the trees lingered like a hidden threat. The figure had disappeared into the shadows, leaving only the sound of rustling leaves and a feeling of worry. Todd's muffled complaints still came from the cellar below, but the three friends knew they had to leave. The paper's proof of Todd's connections to a hidden group were their only chance, and they needed to act before unknown forces came after them. Mike looked around the shore and spotted a small inflatable raft tied to an old dock. "Over there," he said quietly but firmly, pointing to the raft. "We have to get out of here." Mary nodded, her face pale, her black dress dirty and torn at the bottom. Jake, still holding his homemade device, nodded quickly, his determination clear. They ran towards the dock, their footsteps crunching on the gravel. The bag swung in Mary's hand like a lifeline. The raft looked worn, with patches on its rubber, but it was still afloat. Mike pushed it into the water, the cold splashing at his ankles as he helped Mary get on. Jake untied the rope and jumped in as the raft swayed. Mike pushed off, using the paddle to row across the smooth surface of the lake, moving them away from the cabin. The shore grew smaller, the cabin becoming just a dark shape among the trees. But Mike felt uneasy, the stranger's shadow still on his mind. A buzzing sound broke the morning silence, sharp and mechanical. Mike looked up and saw a black drone rising from the trees, its red light shining as it focused on them. A thin beam shot from its bottom, hitting the side of the raft and leaving a faint mark. Mary gasped and held the bag tighter while Jake muttered under his breath. "Todd has more tricks," Mike said, gripping the paddle tightly, his arms aching as he paddled faster. Mary's eyes narrowed, a hint of bravery showing. She searched the bag and pulled out the broken recorder from the cellar. "Wait," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. She flipped a switch, and Todd's voice crackled from the device, mocking them. "You'll break, Mikey." Mary turned up the volume, aiming the recorder at the drone, the distorted sound echoing on the water. The drone's beam flickered, its path shaking as the signal disrupted its controls. Suddenly, the drone veered sharply, its buzzing changed to a whine as it spiraled downwards. It crashed into the lake with a splash, spraying water into the air, with the wreckage bobbing in the sunlight. Without hesitating, Mike leaned over the raft, plunging his fingers into the cold water to grab the drone's slick body. He pulled the device onto the raft, small sparks flying and water dripping onto the floor. "There has to be something useful in this," he said, urgency in his voice. "A tracker, a signal, something to let us know who is behind this." Jake's eyes brightened as he started to open the device's cover. "I can figure it out," he said, taking out a small tool from his pocket. "Just give me a little time and I'll discover where it's sending information. Todd is not the one in charge." His words reminded them all of the bigger problems lurking beneath the surface, hints of a group mentioned in the papers they had found. The raft drifted toward the lake's edge, where a rusty pipe stuck out from the shore, wide enough to let them through. Jake pointed to it, speaking quietly. "That pipe leads to an old factory. It's our best chance to escape anyone following us." Mike nodded and steered the raft into the dark opening of the pipe. Inside, the air felt damp and had a metallic scent, while the sound of dripping water echoed as the raft brushed against the concrete walls. The inside of the pipe was dark, the sunlight fading behind them. Mary took out a wrinkled map from the bag, its edges worn and dirty. She shined her flashlight on the paper, revealing a hand-drawn layout of the area. "This is it," she said, her voice shaky with the realization. "Todd used this place before. He kept people here." Her words carried a heavy weight, revealing Todd's past actions. Mike's stomach turned at the thought had others faced this before him. The raft hit a concrete ledge, and the pipe opened into a large room under an old factory. Jake jumped out, splashing into shallow water, and found a rusty generator against the wall. He pulled the starter cord, and the machine sputtered to life, its hum filling the room. A dim light flickered on from above, showing a large steel gate blocking the factory's entrance. Jake knelt next to it, working on the control panel, its wires exposed and worn. The air filled with the smell of oil and rust, and the factory walls rose like the remains of a long-gone creature. Mike shined his flashlight around the room, catching sight of something on the floor, a trail leading down a narrow hallway. His heart raced, and he tightened his grip on the paddle. "Todd's been here," he said quietly, the sight a grim reminder of Mary's words. "This place feels wrong." Mary's hand touched his, her grip cold but urgent. "I'm sorry, Mike," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I never wanted to pull you into this." Her eyes were filled with tears, her face showing guilt and fear. But Mike wasn't sure if she was truly sorry or just acting. He wanted to trust her and hold on to the love they once shared, but the pain of her betrayal lingered like a dark cloud. Jake raised his hand, quieting them as he concentrated on the gate's keypad. "Not now," he said quietly, expertly rewiring the panel. A spark flew, and the gate creaked open, its old hinges protesting loudly. The hallway beyond was dark, with walls lined with broken cameras, their lenses shining faintly in the flickering light. The air felt heavy, as if the factory itself was holding its breath. Mike stepped forward, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, following a trail as they moved deeper into the factory. Mary held the heavy bag in her arms, its contents both a blessing and a curse. Jake followed closely, his multi-tool still in one hand, his eyes searching for anything suspicious. The hallway opened into a large, empty room, its ceiling held up by rusty beams, the floor scattered with debris, a lonely space that felt like a trap. Suddenly, a crackle broke the stillness, and a distorted voice spoke through a hidden speaker. "Welcome to the final game," it said in a low tone, sending a chill down Mike's spine. It was not Todd's voice, but something colder and more calculated. The words echoed around the factory, and the three of them froze, their eyes darting towards the shadows. The game wasn't over. It was getting more serious, and the true mastermind was finally showing themselves. The large room loomed like a tomb, with rusty beams casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The air was filled with the smell of oil and decay, and the flickering lights barely lit up the empty space. Mike, Mary, and Jake stood still, the echo of the strange voice, "Welcome to the final game," still ringing in their ears. The words were cold and mechanical, different from Todd's personal grudge, hinting at a larger and more sinister force controlling their nightmare. The bag of important papers in Mary's hands felt heavier than ever, holding secrets they had yet to fully understand. Mike's heart raced, his eyes scanning the shadows for the source of the voice, but the area remained empty, except for a large iron cage in the center, its bars shining like teeth in the dim light. A low sound broke the silence, and Todd stepped out from the darkness, his large frame stumbling toward the cage. His clothes were torn and messy, and his blonde hair was damp with sweat. His eyes, wide and fierce, showed a deep anger that seemed to take over him, yet they also reflected an emptiness, as if the man he was disappearing. He held a knife in one hand, its blade shining in the light, and his lips twisted in a sneer when he saw Mike. "You thought you could keep me locked away, Mikey," he said, his voice rough but full of spite. "This ends now." Mary stepped forward, her face pale but determined, the bag shaking in her hand. In a sudden brave move, she threw the folder of papers at Todd's face, scattering the pages like dust. "Your game is over, Todd!" she yelled, her voice shaking with both fear and anger. "We know who you work for! We have everything!" Her words echoed in the large room, a bold challenge hiding the fear in her eyes. Todd caught the folder, gripping it tightly as he let out an unsettling laugh that felt crazy. "You think those papers matter?" he mocked, throwing the folder to the ground, its contents spreading out on the floor. "You're nobody, Mikey. You've always been nobody." His laughter cut through the little hope Mike had held on to, but Todd showed no fear, only a reckless defiance. Mike felt a rush of anger, pushing away his tiredness. He rushed forward, fists clenched, and crashed into Todd, sending him to the ground. The cage shook as they hit the bars, Mike's voice a fierce shout. "I'm ending this!" he yelled, his hands reaching for Todd, fueled by years of hidden hurt and betrayal. The space around them shrank, focusing all on this moment of revenge. Hannah came out from the shadows, her cap pulled low, her eyes wide with fear. She quickly moved toward Todd, grasping the knife in his hand. With a quick, desperate pull, she yanked it free, stumbling back as the blade shone in her trembling grip. "Stop this!" she pleaded, her voice breaking, glancing between Todd and Mike. Her fear was clear, and it caught Mike off guard. Before anyone could respond, a hissing noise filled the air, and a cloud of gas burst from hidden vents in the cage. The strong smell made Mike's eyes sting, and he began to cough hard. Mary grabbed him, covering his nose and mouth to shield him from the worst of it. "Breathe through this," she urged, holding a torn piece of her dress against his face. Her touch was hurried, her eyes full of tears, but her determination was strong, a hint of the woman Mike had loved shining through her panic. Jake, coughing and staggering, swung his flashlight at the ceiling, breaking the flickering light bulb in a shower of sparks and glass. Shards fell around them. One grazed Todd's shoulder, and he dropped to his knees, gasping for air. Foam appeared at his lips, and his eyes rolled back as he slumped against the cage, the dagger falling from his hand. It was a disturbing image, a man brought down by his own actions, but Mike felt no pleasure, only a deep ache inside. Mary fell to her knees beside Todd, trembling as she tried to loosen the straps on his wrists. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she desperately tried to free him, hoping that her actions might change all they had suffered. "He doesn't deserve this," she whispered softly, her eyes fixed on Todd, who lay unconscious. Her words felt like a confession and a request, and they hurt Mike more than he wanted to admit. Without thinking, Mike's hands moved to Todd's throat, squeezing tightly in anger. The urge to end Todd's life, to erase the man who had made everything so difficult, overwhelmed him. His focus narrowed down to Todd's still face and shallow breathing. But Mary grabbed his hand, holding it tightly with urgency. "Don't, Mike," she pleaded, her voice shaky. "Don't become him. You're better than this." Her tears dripped onto his hands, and her words pulled him back from the brink. Before he could answer, the room filled with footsteps echoing on the floor. Flashlights sliced through the darkness as a loud voice echoed, "Stop! Put down your weapons!" Police officers in uniforms rushed in, aiming their rifles at the cage. Mike's hands fell away from Todd, and he sagged, overwhelmed by the moment. Mary leaned against him, shaking with sobs. Their bodies were tangled in exhaustion and relief. Todd stirred, his eyes opened as officers pulled him to his feet, putting handcuffs on him. He looked at Mike, a flicker of anger still there, but it was dimmed and broken. "This isn't over," he weakly muttered as he was led away, his large frame drooping under the weight of his loss. Mike and Mary sat down on the ground, still holding hands, the bag they had brought lying forgotten among scattered papers. The police were working quickly to secure the area, but Mike's gaze was pulled to the edge of the arena, where a lone person stood in the shadows. He couldn't see their face, but they wore a slight, mysterious smile, a chilling reminder that things might not be finished. The figure disappeared into the darkness as quickly as they had come, leaving Mike with a lingering sense of worry. The arena became quiet, the officers' voices fading into a soft hum as Mike held Mary close, her warmth a fragile comfort in the chaos. The papers, the gas, the cage. It was all part of a bigger problem they had only started to understand. But for now, Todd was gone, and they were safe. The fight had cost them a lot, but it also created a new bond between them, one shaped by survival and a determination to face whatever came next. The empty arena of the factory turned into a blur of flashing police lights and the crackle of radios, the confusion of Todd's capture contrasting sharply with the calm that followed. Mike and Mary sat together on the cold concrete, their hands joined and their bodies shaking from exhaustion and relief. The pile of documents lay scattered around them, its pages a reminder of the nightmare they had just survived. Todd's last harsh words, "This isn't over," played in Mike's mind, but seeing him taken away in handcuffs gave a small sense of closure. The mysterious person who watched from the shadows had disappeared, leaving behind a nagging feeling that the larger problem still lingered. For now, though, they were free, and the weight of that truth anchored Mike as he held Mary close, her warmth reminding him they had faced the darkness together. Weeks later, the clean air of the courtroom replaced the factory's decay. The trial of Todd Fisher was a major news story, with reporters crowding the courthouse steps, their cameras flashing. Inside, the room was a mix of polished wood benches and the serious sound of the judge's gavel contrasting with the emotional weight of the trial. Mary stood in the witness chair, dressed in a simple gray suit, her auburn hair pulled back neatly. Her voice shook as she shared Todd's wrongdoings, the kidnapping, the mental distress, the troubles in the cellar, and the documents linking him to a mysterious group. Each word felt like a hurt, her eyes shining with tears as she spoke about the betrayal that had spoiled their wedding day. "He wanted to break us," she said, her voice wavering. "But he didn't." Mike sat in the front row, resting his hand on the bench, his gaze fixed on Mary. He wanted to reach for her, to pull her away from the stand and protect her from the attention, but he chose to look at her steadily, his eyes showing quiet strength. His own wounds, the marks on his wrists, the pain in his chest were still fresh, but watching Mary confront their nightmare made him feel a fierce pride. She was no longer the cold figure from the limo or the unsure person in the cellar. She was a survivor, reclaiming her story. Todd, sitting at the defense table, seemed a shadow of the person he once was. His large frame seemed smaller, his blonde hair messy, and his eyes were empty yet still showed defiance. When it was his turn, he leaned into the microphone, his voice filled with anger. "They're lying," he yelled, pointing at Mary and looking at Jake, who sat quietly in the back. "Mary and that guy Jake set me up. Those papers are fake, planted to blame me." His words were filled with desperation, a last-ditch effort to change the story, but the silence of the courtroom made it clear that the evidence against him was strong. Mary's hands trembled as she pulled out a small USB drive marked Veritas in bold black letters. She gave it to the bailiff, her voice firm despite her tears. "This is the truth," she said. Todd's own voice, recorded in the cellar, admitting everything. The courtroom stirred as the video played, Todd's unsettling voice filling the room, confessing his plan to embarrass Mike and get back at him for something that happened in the past. The jury's expressions hardened, their decision almost made. The judge's gavel struck down hard, sentencing Todd Fisher to life in prison without the chance of release. The words echoed in the courtroom, final and firm. Todd's head lowered, his defiance fading as officers surrounded him, taking him away toward a life in dark cells. His figure disappeared through the courtroom door, lost in shadows, a fitting end for someone who thrived on them. Mary faced her own consequences, the prosecution questioning her part in Todd's plan. She stood tall, her eyes filled with regret as she admitted her involvement, her voice raw. "I was tricked," she said, looking at Mike. "I let him pull me into his life, but I fought to escape. I chose Mike." Her words were a confession, a call for forgiveness, and Mike felt the weight of it in his heart. He walked to her side and whispered, "Stay strong. Speak the truth." He took her hand, and she signed the document with a shaking hand, her signature a promise to confront her past. Jake, on the other hand, remained a quiet mystery. He sat at the back of the courtroom, his eyes hidden, his body tense. When it was time for him to testify, he refused, his voice low and troubled. "I've done my part," he said quietly, not meeting Mike's gaze. His choice felt like a wound, a reminder of the gap that had formed between them, but Mike understood. Jake had risked everything to help them, and his silence was his own battle, fought in darkness that Mike couldn't yet comprehend. As Todd was taken away, the sound of his handcuffs echoed, and his last look at Mike was filled with hatred, quickly snuffed out by the closing door. The courtroom was empty now, and reporters scattered as Mike and Mary stepped outside into the bright daylight. The sky was a clear blue. They paused at the gates of the courthouse, feeling a little lighter after all they had been through. Mike reached into his pocket and took out a small old ring, not their wedding band, but one from a safe in their cabin, marked with the numbers 562312. It reminded them of the difficult times they had faced. He placed it in Mary's hand, and their fingers intertwined. "This is us now," he said gently but firmly, "not what he made us." Mary's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded and slipped the ring onto her finger. It was a sign of survival, not of romance, showing how far they had come. They drove silently to a private island they had once dreamed of visiting for their honeymoon, a place untouched by their past. The villa they had rented stood by the sea, its white walls shining in the morning light. The salty air felt refreshing, a strong contrast to the sadness they had known before. Mary led Mike to a small hatch in the floor of the villa, an old feature from when it was built. She opened it to show a dusty space below, empty yet full of possibilities. "No more secrets," she said with determination. She cleaned the area, removing cobwebs and dirt as if she were clearing away their painful memories. Mike watched her, feeling hope blossom in his heart. The woman in front of him was different now. She had grown strong through their struggles. They stepped out onto the beach, the cool sand beneath their feet and the gentle waves caressing the shore. The sunrise painted the sky in beautiful shades of gold and pink, signaling a fresh start. Mike held Mary's hand tightly, their fingers fitting together perfectly, and they looked into each other's eyes with trust. The marks from their past, both physical and mental, would remain, but they were determined to move forward. Though the figure from the factory and the problems related to Todd still lingered in the background, for now, they stood united, looking toward the horizon, ready to welcome whatever came next.